It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Kiana King has a doctorate in public health with a concentration in preventive care from Loma Linda University and a master's in psychology with a clinical emphasis from Pepperdine University. Dr. King is one of the first recipients of the prestigious Bill and Melinda Gates Millennium Scholarship and has extensive experience. She has extensive experience utilizing the community-based participatory research CBPR approach with minority communities. Dr. King is an assistant professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in the College of Public Health, Department of Health Promotion. She practices the CBPR approach to engage community in projects to address health disparities through UNMC's Center for Reducing Health Disparities. Specifically, she partners with the North Omaha community to address priority health needs identified by the community, such as mental health, chronic disease, intervention and prevention, violence, and improving the diversity of healthcare workforce. Dr. King also teaches the applications of CBPR to doctoral students in the PhD of Health Promotion and Disease Prevention program. Dr. King focuses her personal research efforts on using CBPR to understand and address depression in African American men and improving mental health and physical health outcomes for African Americans and American Indians and Native Americans. Finally, she's also the director of the IDEA CTR Community Engagement Outreach Corps, which is hosting this activity today. So with that, please help me welcome Dr. King.
I know y'all tired of hearing me talk today, but you're gonna hear me talk for another hour. Okay, so thank you for all being here. I know it's a long day, so I'm hoping that I'll get you moving a little bit to start out this presentation and do a little bit less talking and a little bit more hearing from you all. But before I get started, I just wanted to describe my title of my presentation, which is Until Health Equity Do Us Part. I want to stress the emphasis that we are in partnerships, and partnerships, community academic partnerships are like marriage, right? What we say when we have our vows, I'm not married, but people, when they get married, have their vows, they say, till death do them part. And so in the community academic partnership, I want you to think about your partnership in the fact that you're together until health equity do you part, right? We're trying to reach that in the things that we do. And so you'll be together for a long time because we have our work cut out for us in terms of achieving health equity. So that was the purpose of me having that as our title for today. Okay, so like I said, I'm gonna start out with some activities, but before I do, I always want to acknowledge my community and academic mentors, in particular my community mentors. The late, great Dr. Loretta Jones has developed the activities that we are going to do today together. So I always want to make sure that I am forever grateful and give her a shout out any chance that I get. But I also have my academic mentors from back in Los Angeles, as you probably heard in my intro. I spent a lot of time in LA specifically. So I'll always give gratitude to them as well as my other community partners that are listed on the slide. Okay, so our first activity that we're gonna do today is taking a look at this picture. Do y'all all know what this picture is? Yes? Okay, good. Anybody wanna tell me what this is a picture of? Anyone could say. Just make sure y'all use your mics for the people that are online. Don't forget, sorry.
Knights of the Round Table.
Knights of the Round Table, exactly. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Knights of the Round Table, this is basically King Arthur's legendary knights who were like the cream of the crop back then. And they were charged with basically making sure that they provided safety from harm for the kingdom, protecting the kingdom, and then of course, protecting each other. So I want to ask you then, we don't have time to have everybody go around. So I'll just ask for volunteers. If you could just introduce yourself and then explain to me what this picture means to you. And if I don't get volunteers, I will definitely call on someone.
Hi, it's me, Michael, again. I'm always the person talking to these things. When I see that, I think of unity as the foundation, both for ideals and action, given that there are knives, but also I think about how unity is holistic, you know, it's a circle, 360 degrees, all the way around.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share? What does this picture mean to you? Thank you, Dr. Metcalf. All right. Yeah. Good. Anyone else? I'll take one more taker.
My name is Heidi Keeler. I'm in the IDSCTR, Community Engagement and Outreach Corps. To me, this is about, it was very intentional that King Arthur put his knights in a circle so that they all had equal access to, you know, give their feedback and to contribute. So that's what I think. That's like an ideal.
Good. All right. So why did I ask you what that picture means to you? It's because it's important for us to have these types of icebreaker activities whenever we are starting a partnership between community and academic partners. And so the purpose of this one, we call it the Knights of the Round Table. I mean, obviously, right? And the purpose of this is for transparency, or to create transparency among the partners that are involved in the work that you're doing together. And so the concept of the round table ensures that everyone's commitment, accountability, and concerns are represented, considered, and seen. The circular table reflects transparency, consistency, and continuity. Okay. And so some of your answers were spot on with that. And I like this activity, like I said, because it's an opportunity for partners that are getting to know each other to really set the standard for being transparent, being open, and making sure that people feel comfortable that they are all at the table, they are equals, and everybody voice matters at that table. Okay, so that's that one. I have another activity. So this will require you to actually have to get up. If you could, since there's a lot of us, if we could form 2 circles, it's okay if the tables are kind of like in the middle, but if you can kind of form 2 circles for me. So everybody stand up. And people online, I will move the camera so you don't have to look at the wall. You could actually see what we're doing. Form 2 circles for me. I'm gonna have to get my Chuck Woolery on for a second here. Okay. Heidi, I am going to give you this one and just hold it here and then just hold onto that for a second. I'll give you directions. And then I'm gonna give you this one and hold it here and hold this as well. Kind of unravel them just a little bit, so that way you can get it to the next person. Okay, so what we're gonna do for this activity is that one person's holding it and you're gonna answer the question that was on the screen that I'm gonna put back on the screen. Okay, you're gonna answer the question, why did you decide to attend today? And once you answer that question, then you'll throw or toss the yarn to anyone else. But the rule is you can't toss it to the person next to you. It has to be someone across from you, okay? But hold on to the yarn when you have it. So If you have it in your hand, you hold on to that, you toss it to the person, they answer the question, and then you hold on to the yarn still and toss it to the next. So everybody should still be holding on to the yarn as it goes, okay? So go ahead and do that. And then as soon as everybody has tossed it, I'll come back to the larger group. But hold on to your yarn until then, okay? Go ahead. Okay, the purpose of this activity is holding on to the yarn demonstrates that you have insights and value in the partnership. At times, you will be asked to help find the answer to many complex situations, while other times you may not. This does not mean you're not valuable, but it explains the trust and understanding that is necessary for the partnership. We support each other, so never let go. Everyone is building a web that will hold the community together. Okay, so that's the purpose of that. All right, so I'm gonna hand the scissors over so you can cut off the extra string, and then I'll take the additional, and then we'll have you all have a seat, and we'll get started with the lecture part. Okay, I like to walk when I talk, so this is going to be incredibly hard for me to stand at the podium and talk to you. So I might pull a fast one and walk around with the mic, but forgive me if I do. I know some people might be not like the motion, but yeah. Okay, so those activities are different examples, like I said, of ways that we can start to initiate partnerships. When we encounter new partners, whether they're a community partner or an academic partner, and you're an academic partner, or you're a community partner, another community partner, vice versa, you can use these activities. So you'll find in your folder a handout on the right side, and I think it's in one of the back handouts that explains these two activities of how you do it and what materials might be needed, as well as some other activities that are also different icebreakers. So depending on what your resources are, there's the ones like I showed you with the Knights of Round Table, which doesn't require any resources to do those. And then there's others like the Web of Yarn that you need to obviously purchase some yarn to do. So you have some different options. And if you read through it, it'll tell you kind of what the purpose of those different activities are for, especially if you're trying to do certain things like create more transparency in your partnership, build a vision for what you and your partners are doing. So kind of pay attention to those things in terms of the purposes for each of those activities. Okay, so today what I really want to cover in the next 40 minutes or so is one, understanding how to build community academic partnerships. The second is to describe the 3 dimensions of partnership sustainability. I know that this is quite a challenge sometimes, especially for partnerships that are brought together to work on a specific project, but just because a project is over does not mean that you can't continue to work together in some fashion. And then lastly, I'll describe some of the best practices for trying to make sure that that partnership sustainability continues on. Okay, so if we're going to initiate partnerships, like I said, we can start with those icebreakers, but after we get through the icebreaker, then what? Well, it's really important that we first start to make sure that we demonstrate mutual trust, respect, and commitment to that partnership. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by showing up, being present, and making sure that you're helping one another in a way that is showing that you're committed to that relationship. That could mean going to events for your community partner, the community partner going to events for the academic partner, taking time out of your busy schedules, I'm sure all of you have, and having lunch, coffee or tea with your partners and connecting on a more individual level, but also connecting as partners, making sure that you understand the work that's being done by each partnership, and how those different efforts can be aligned or overlap in a way that would help to move forward any project or partnership activities that you're doing together. Second, we want to make sure whenever you are developing this partnership that you agree on mission goals and outcomes. This is really important, especially for both the community and academic partners, in the sense that sometimes academic partners come in and they have goals of what they want to do, how they want to achieve things. And community partners are typically the ones that are asked to be a part of these partnerships or these projects. And sometimes may not understand what those goals are. So I implore and encourage community partners to ask, what are the missions and the goals or the outcomes of this project? And make sure, you know, as a partner, you make sure that aligns with what you want to do or what it is that you're charged with doing. If it doesn't align, it's okay to say no. And the same for academic partners. Sometimes community partners will approach, and if you're not quite sure what the mission goals or outcomes are, it's okay to get clarification on it, talk about it, discuss, and then maybe there could be some alignment that happens and that partnership can continue or move forward. Next, you want to make sure that you focus on identified strengths and needs. Too often in this type of research, community engaged research, we focus on the deficits, right? The needs, what they don't have, they as in the community may not have, but really we have to start transitioning how we talk and think and work with community in terms of identifying what are the strengths, what are the assets of that community that we can leverage in order to address the needs, in order to make sure that we can overcome any deficits that may be there. So really trying to have more of a solution focus rather than a problem-based focus in terms of how those partnerships develop over time. Next, you want to make sure we're having clear communication and transparency in decision-making. I can't stress this enough. A lot of community academic partnerships tend to fall apart when there isn't clear communication. And so really at the beginning of these partnerships, it's important that you determine what is the common language. Sometimes the word that I use may not be how a community partner may interpret it. And so we have to make sure that we're speaking the same language when we talk about research, when we talk about the community, so that way we're not offending each other in making sure we're building those relationships. And some, you know, partners may kind of have that one strike you're out rule. If you say the wrong thing from the jump, then it's over. And so, you know, making sure both you come into the partnership with humility and understanding that if you don't understand the community, that's okay to say. It's better to say that than to come in and pretend like you know what's going on. So making sure that there's clear communication and transparency just goes back to the fact that if you're making decisions in a project, you have to be clear about why you made or you're suggesting a certain decision be made. This is when hidden agendas become an issue in these types of partnerships. And so you want to be able to avoid those by making sure that you're transparent all the time. Even if it's not the most popular of ideas or perspectives, it's important to do that. We also want to make sure when we're developing these partnerships that we don't minimize anyone in that partnership. Sometimes it's more than just two groups or organizations that are coming together. It can be multiple. I have a project where we have 10, or Fabio and I have a project where we have about 10 to 15 community partners in that. And so when it gets into those types of numbers in terms of those partnerships involved in projects, want to make sure we're using the feedback to, among, and from all partners. And so if you're noticing that there's partners that aren't particularly engaged, let's figure out why they may not be engaged, whether that's a community partner or an academic partner. And if there's things that we can do in that partnership to help that person be more engaged or that group be more engaged, then let's do that. Sometimes, which I'll get into later, partners, it's not that they don't want to do the work, they just don't have the capacity to do that work. And so maybe there's something that we can do to support those partners in doing that additional work to allow them to come into being a part of that project. So really going beyond thinking about just kind of your project in that moment, and really think about what are the other things that in the environment, in the surrounding area that affect their ability to be involved in the project. We also want to think about developing governance structures that help to define roles. It helps to define norms, a process that really helps the partnership to flow. This is more important than you think. And a lot of times this gets skipped a lot in these types of partnerships because we're ready to get down to the work, do it, let's get it done. We're excited, which is fantastic and everything, but what happens when you run into problems? When there's a conflict, there's something that's going on that you need to talk through. If there isn't a process or some type of structure that is set up in order to address those issues, then it can be damaging to that partnership or that relationship. So governing structures are really important in terms of setting up bylaws, having a structure or a flow that everybody can agree upon. I had worked on a project in Los Angeles, to give you an example, called the Healthy Community Neighborhood Initiative. And we purposely put in bylaws, but also governing structure for when there were problems between partners. We actually had data collection. So we go to a house in pairs, a community and an academic partner. And this is kind of a rough area of South Los Angeles. And one time we went into a home and a cell phone came up missing. And so our group found out this information. We called a meeting, and our governing structure called for a community and an academic partner to co-facilitate that issue, because what happened was somebody blamed one of the community partners that went into the home for taking the phone. And so there was a lot of tension in that situation, but because we had that governing structure in place in terms of how that situation was facilitated, again, a community and academic partner. And then once everybody had a chance in those meetings to kind of hash it out, and we had the mediation happening with those facilitators, then we were able to come to a conclusion in that a smaller work group within our larger partnership work together to come up with a resolve for how do we address the issue. And so that allowed us to kind of streamline the process and deal with it head on, but also being able to come up with a solution. So thinking through some of those governing structures in terms of what happens when we have these types of issues that may arise during data collection or any other points of your project. We also want to remember to build and maintain relationships with academic leadership and funding agencies. This is important in terms of your partnership. You have academic partners that may be a part of your project, but they also have leaders that they have to report to, or they have to report out something to. And so it's really important, I think, from the community partner side to make sure that you're aware, who are these academic leaders and how do we get them to understand the work that we're doing, and then work with your academic partner in order to make sure that that work is shared with those academic leaders. So that way we can continue to basically garner support for that partnership to continue. What we find, which I'll also talk about a little bit later, is that the funding is hard to maintain and sustain these types of partnerships. And so sometimes if we are have good relationships with academic leadership, there's opportunities there where we can leverage some of those more stable funding mechanisms, or even just resources that would help to maintain or sustain that partnership. So making sure we tap into those. Having good relationships with funding agencies is super important, whether that be at the local or the federal level. And again, this could be something that happens either with the community partners or the academic partners, depending on how you decide in your partnership who develops those relationships for or on behalf of your group. But making sure that you have those relationships built both with academic leaders as well as funding agencies, which Ms. Wendy will talk about a little bit later. Lastly, we want to make sure we use existing structures in order for us to incorporate solutions into the mission of whatever project we are working on. So typically, we want to look outside of just the community too that we're working in. So community partners, typically that's what we would as academic partners come to the community to say, hey, what are some of the different structures in the community that we can leverage in order to improve or continue the work, enhance the work that you're doing. But think about also what are the structures that exist on the academic partner side, because they also have access to structures that could help to support the work that you're doing. If they are at an academic institution like UNMC, we have a hospital. We also have a number of clinics around the city. So thinking about not just the structures that exist in the community that can be leveraged, but also thinking about those structures outside the community that can be brought in that could be leveraged, or they may already exist in that community, and they're just not being used. For instance, Fontenelle Clinic is right next door. That is a part of Nebraska Medicine as an academic partner. If you have one in your project, that could be something that could be leveraged for the work that you're attempting to do together. Yes, Dr. Metcalf.
I wanted to, can you go back one slide? Sorry.
Sure.
So on number 6, are there templates or examples of governance structures that can be shared?
Yes. So we had a talk last year where we talked a little bit about a template that we did share. It's on our website, so I can have Emily send that to you as well. I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but there is a template you can follow. You can also do memorandums of understandings, MOUs, if some of you know the acronym rather than actually what it stands for. That's me all the time. But you can also create those as opportunities to at least establish kind of where you're starting. And then as you get going, then you start to really develop a governing structure in terms of how the actual work gets done, and who does what. So with all of these, this sounds easy, right? Like, yeah, let me just go ahead and do all of those eight things that she talked about. Well, it's challenging, right? There are challenges we're going to run into in developing these partnerships, and we have to address those challenges in order for any of those points on the previous slides to work. So first, we have to address the lack of trust and respect. I know we all are pretty much aware of the different institutional histories related to research. I think Paul mentioned it earlier in his talk about helicopter research, flying in, getting what you need and flying out, and then the community won't hear from you again. Those types of historical research have damaged relationships with community, less likely to be involved in these types of things, types of research projects, because they don't trust, and rightfully so. There's been some sordid things that's happened in our history related to research, where you're actually taking away people's ability to make decisions about themselves. The sterilization of American Indians, Tuskegee experiment, which is also known as the syphilis study. But those types of research projects really instill a level of mistrust, and communities feel like they're not respected. But also from the community standpoint, if that is the case, it's important to share that with the academic partner, that I don't trust you, if that's how you feel, right? It's, again, transparency is important for both sides. So making sure that there are those spaces and opportunities to have that dialogue before you jump into the work. Because if you go into something, you try to jump into the work and you don't address those things, they will show up in other ways throughout your project that could potentially slow down the work you're doing or just bring it to a screeching halt. So it's really important to make time for these types of conversations to build trust and build respect amongst one another. There's also an equitable distribution of power and control in these relationships. I think in all relationships, whether it's a partnership or a marriage, there is power and control in these relationships, right? You know, the wife might have power over the husband in a way that nobody else does. That happens in community academic partnerships as well. And we have to acknowledge that. And typically it has been, or historically, it has been the academic partner is the one that has the power and allegedly has the control. But really, we are supposed to be sharing that power and that control and being comfortable to let go of the reins and trusting both partners or both sides of the partnership that they can do the work and allow them to do it, and let go. I know a lot of academic researchers might be a little type A personalities, but we just have to remember to keep ourselves in check. And I'll talk a little bit about how we can do that to make sure that we don't run into this too often or than we typically need to for these types of projects. I'm not saying that this won't happen, because ultimately that's just how relationships go, where there might be that power struggle. But the point is to recognize it and deal with it. But if you don't deal with it and just kind of let it fester, again, it brings your work to a screeching halt, and it could damage relationships and damage your potential to even build relationships with other people in the community or other people in academia, because guess what? People talk, we gossip all the time. And unfortunately, it does interfere with people's ability to do work. We also want to think about the challenge of conflicts associated with different perspectives, personalities, assumptions, language. I talked about this a little bit already, so I won't beat it to death, but the point is that we want to recognize that we're different. And it's okay to be different and not sit here and say, oh, we're all the same. No, we're not. We're all different in a way. And we all have something we bring to the table, and we have to be respectful of each other's perspectives. But also making sure that you're not disrespecting someone when you do share your perspective. And that comes from both sides, community or academic. But that also goes back to the idea of making sure you have governing structures in place so that you can have these conversations in a safe space and in a way that's going to be productive for your relationship building. We also want to make sure that there are conflicts there, that we address the challenge of conflicts over funding. This is more common than we think, but this is kind of one of those silent type of challenges where typically a person or a partner in the partnership may just bow out and you don't know why. That's typically, in my experience, how that has happened. We're like, oh, why did so-and-so not want to be a part of this anymore? And we come to find out it's because they didn't feel like the budget was fair. And typically with these types of research projects, the academic partner is the one that would apply for the grant. They get the money, it's housed at the university, and then the community partners might be broken off some pieces of it, right? So it's important that conversations happen about funding at the very beginning. Talk money initially. And we all know that money is also a demise of many marriages as well. So we don't want that to be the demise of your partnership. So make sure that money and funding, especially when you're talking about a grant, is talked about early, and you're transparent about how you do that. Prime example, in our Healthy at Home project with Fabio, we had meetings with our community partners in which we paid them to come because we value their time, but also in those meetings, we shared the budget. We literally shared the budget of this is what we have, this is how we are planning to spend it, this is what we were thinking to allocate for our community partners. Is that enough? And if it's not enough, how do we make it to make it work? And we went back and forth with that conversation until we were able to figure out what that would look like. And then we submitted our budget, but we literally had those conversations with them rather than it kind of being like, we'll give you this amount, but then they aren't aware of what the total budget is for the entire grant, how much it panned out for each year. Because the grant we went for is a 5-year grant. So we want to make sure we were very transparent about each year, how much money is allocated, how much is going to community. So have those conversations to overcome this type of challenge. And then promotion and tenure for academics. I put this on here for both community and academic partners, mainly because community partners don't always know that there are requirements for a researcher, especially if they're linked to an institution, that they want to get promoted and they want to get tenure. That's really sometimes the goal for a lot of people that are faculty members at universities. And so it's important that community partners know that so that they are able to understand some motive. It may not be the only piece motivating a person, but it is a part of the work that we're doing. But also the academic partner needs to be transparent about these types of things so that the community partner is aware that, hey, you know, I have to publish these manuscripts because this helps with me and my job and my career trajectory so that I can get further. But I also want to make sure that I'm publishing in a way that may be making sure that you're respectful of that partnership, or publishing in other areas that necessarily community wouldn't necessarily look at a peer-reviewed article, right? Because you got to pay for some of those subscriptions and they're expensive. But maybe publishing in something that is not necessarily peer-reviewed so that community can still have access to it, and understanding that you'll have to do some of that. Sometimes you'll publish for your promotion, and other times you'll publish for community. And I say all this to say that it's really important that we advocate for each other in that sense, that we try to change how promotion and tenure guidelines are set up in academic institutions, because they don't always value the community engaged research that we're doing, the work that we're doing, in a way that should be valued because we're spending time together to do it. So why not get credit for what we're doing? So on our end in academia, we're working to try to change those things, but it's helpful if community partners know about these things so that they can also advocate to make sure that hey, I'm a part of this, it is valuable, and we want the university to also value it. So really just trying to make sure that these conversations happen about things that seem so frivolous or just kind of like, oh, well, it's just in the background, but this does also affect our ability to work together. Okay, I'm going to transition to talking a little bit about sustainability. And so before I get into the weeds of that, I always like to start with a definition of what sustainability is, because not everybody defines sustainability the same. In fact, I think people struggle with what does it mean to create something sustainable, especially when they ask you in a grant, how are you going to sustain this project? And you're like, with the money you give me. But after that money goes away, again, how do you sustain it? The same thing with the partnership. Then that money goes away. How do we continue to work together in a way that's still fruitful for all parties that are involved? So sustainability, how we're defining it for the purpose of moving forward with this presentation, but also how I encourage you to define it as you move forward with the work you do in community engaged research. We want to maintain partnerships as an organization, or you maintain the partnership's values or its initiatives. So it doesn't always have to be about necessarily maintaining the partnerships, but maybe it's about maintaining those initiatives that you started together, maintaining the values that you established together, and taking that into your next partnerships, whatever that may be. But look at it kind of twofold, that either you're maintaining those partnerships or you're actually maintaining what came out of those partnerships, whether that's the initiative or some type of value add that you created together. So like I said, what happens when the grant ends? Like I said, usually the partnership decides that maybe the time that they spent together doesn't outweigh the benefits of participation. That happens sometimes. But what happens when it's the opposite? When you actually you got some benefit out of it and you want to continue that partnership? How do you do that? There's 3 dimensions of sustainability. So I'll walk through each of these quickly. So that way you can kind of understand what are some different ways that we can go about making sure that we sustain our partnerships. So the first is sustaining relationships and commitments. What that basically means is how our relationships and commitments in terms of our partnerships continued over time. So there's challenges to doing this. Of course, there's lack of time and resources. This goes for both community and academic partners. When we just don't have the time to do something, we don't do it. If we don't have the resources, we don't do it. This is particularly important in terms of the academic side, that once a grant ends, that grant typically pays for a portion of their time to work on that grant. And now that that portion of time isn't being paid for, they might have shifted that portion to some other project. So then they have those responsibilities for a different project that they can't really commit to staying involved in a project where their time isn't necessarily funded. It happens. The same for community partners. They may see that, yeah, this is a great project, but I need to obtain funding to just keep my organization afloat. And this just simply isn't enough money to do that. So they need to shift their focus to fundraising for their organization as a whole, which may, again, limit their ability to have the time or even the resources necessary to be involved in that partnership. Also, there's sharing reduced resources. So this is when you have resources available, but it's not necessarily enough for all of the partners that are involved. And so you kind of have to play the game of, you know, which partner has the most need, we'll try to fund those, or figure out if one of the partnerships has the largest capacity, they might have to take on more responsibility in order to share resources, just so that everybody can stay involved. So once that starts happening, it can be a process of people feel like, well, I just am not getting enough out of this with these shared resources. I need to split. So it happens. And then lastly, it's just maintaining morale and energy. Over time, if you don't have the funding that's necessary, it sometimes will mess with your ability to be able to have motivation or even the energy to continue it, because guess what? Community engaged research takes time and it is a lot of work, but it's rewarding work if you stick with it. And so really understanding that to maintain each other's morale and energy, we have to be mindful that people's energy might wane and their morale might wane, especially if there's not funding available or there's not resources to wrap around the project or the partnership in and of itself. So what can we do to address these challenges? We want to make sure that we're developing and staying loyal to collaborative principles. These are those principles that basically help us to establish our partnerships together. These are principles that are critical in order for community engaged research to happen. That would be something like critical self-reflection is one of those collaborative principles, to be able to take time to think about how are you as an individual affected in this partnership? How does this look for the entire partnership? How do we make sure that this is working for everyone involved? And so making sure that you develop those principles as a partnership, but also making sure you stay loyal to those principles. If you develop them, don't just kind of say, put them on a paper and put them on a shelf somewhere and never look at them again, but constantly bring those to your meetings. If you have to start your meeting with it to remind people, or you have to end your meetings with it, or if you're in a situation with just several of the partners that might be involved, making sure that you are reminding folks in those partnerships that those principles still apply, even if you're not in a large group meeting. Making sure we create balance between structure and flexibility in those governing partnerships. The bylaws need to be created together. This is something that, like I said, takes some time and is constantly overlooked in these types of partnerships because we're excited to work together. But we really need to make sure that we create a balance in when you develop these types of structures, and making sure that the community and academic partners are sharing in that leadership and sharing in that structure, so that it isn't always one-sided. Sometimes it will be, depending on what phase of the project you're in, where it might be the academic partner taking the lead or the community partner taking the lead. But either way, allow for flexibility and make sure that those structures are put in place so that you can have a successful partnership together. And then, of course, there's a long-term commitment, and then making sure that the right people are at the table. My community mentor, Dr. Jones, used to tell me all the time, sometimes people need to get on the bus and sometimes people need to get off the bus. And sometimes we have to kick people off the bus. But either way, the point is we want to make sure we're constantly assessing, do we have the right people at the table? And it's going to change. It's not going to always be the same people at the table. There's going to be a season and a reason for things, and we need to make sure we're constantly assessing that. And in order to do that, there has to be a long-term commitment to the partnership. This happens at the organizational and the individual level. If we can get that commitment long-term from an organization, that helps to sustain that partnership even longer. Because once the institution, for example, UNMC, would commit to helping to support or sustain that partnership, now you have opened up and have access to resources that you may not have had if they did not have that long-term commitment. So for instance, I work at UNMC, I'm here and they say, yes, we're going to support this partnership. Let's say I leave UNMC. Even with me leaving, the goal is that the organization is still committed. And that is what you need in order to sustain those types of partnerships. Because even if I leave, somebody else can step in and say, okay, we know that Kiana was running this and doing this part. We're stepping in to make sure that we continue to have that partnership and that commitment to this partnership and seeing it through. So getting that long-term commitment from the organization, but also the individuals. And those are our champions, right? That really are always touting for that partnership, the work that you're doing, and making sure that it's well known so that people can know about it. And if they want to provide more resources in whatever way, whether that's money or human resources, then hey, so be it. But those are the ways that we want to try to engage and have long-term commitment from organizations and individuals, as well as making sure we have the right people at the table. Did I go backwards? The last facilitator that I'll talk about in terms of sustaining relationships and commitments is making sure that there is a clear community benefit. A lot of times we may walk into these partnerships and as academic researchers think, yeah, there's a benefit to the community here. And then you meet with your partners, community partners, and they tell you, well, what's in it for us? How is this benefiting us? And you're like, oh, well, I thought, you know, X, Y, and Z might have been the benefit. And they tell you, no, that's not it. So it's important to make sure that there are community benefits and benefits that the community can agree upon, because we can't set those benefits for them. We can't tell them this is the benefit for you. They tell us, how it's going to benefit them. And if it's not going to benefit them, as community partners, please speak up and say that it's not going to benefit you. That's okay. So on the slide, I just give some examples of different ways that we could make sure that the projects or research projects we develop make sure they benefit our community partners in a way. So making sure we have intervention benefits. So that basically is, what do we get out of that intervention once it's implemented, or what does the community get out of the intervention once it's implemented? Making sure that those research findings are used to secure additional funding. That funding may be specifically to run that project or expand the project, but also to create side projects that are kind of one-offs from the main project, or what we call the parent study or parent project. It can enhance your skills and different job promotions as community benefits. So building capacity for community to learn about research. That's a key thing of mine that I like to do in the work that I do, is that I build capacity for my community partners, to learn about research, use those skills, go apply for their own research grants, partner with other people to really kind of expand their network, but also expand their resources. So just a number of different benefits that you could get from making sure that community understands that this is also benefiting them. The second is sustaining knowledge and capacity and values. That's the second dimension of sustainability. And this is basically just making sure that the knowledge that's gained about the local community and conducting community engagement is accumulated by that partnership. So there's challenges to doing this. Mainly, there are limited time and resources to try to make sure that we keep our knowledge on point, our capacity on point, and our values. It takes time to train somebody. That's why we're doing this institute today. So that way, you don't have to build the time into your own partnership. You come to something like this that's offered, and then it helps to grow that partnership in a way that you might not be able to do if you have to take your meeting times for the research project to try to build those types of capacity trainings in, or knowledge transfers in. So making sure that we understand that there are limited time and resources to do this type of work, to do this type of training. Also, there's a lack of broader awareness of shared leadership, or what community engaged research is. A lot of folks don't know, and that's okay. That's why we're all here today, is to learn about it. But that's a challenge of trying to make sure we sustain knowledge, capacity, and values, is that we have to share what we're learning in these partnerships. And we have to share it with other community partners. We have to share it with other academic partners through a number of different ways we can do that. Obviously in academia, we share through peer-reviewed journal articles. And even then, we don't do such a great job of doing it, mainly due to word limits, but sorry, I digress. But the point is that we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we have to share about that so that other people can replicate. They can learn from what we learn from, and make sure that we continue to build the knowledge, the capacity, and the values related to community engaged research. So those are challenges for that, but what are some of the facilitators or ways that we can overcome this type of challenge? Collaboration principles and critical self-reflection. I mentioned this earlier, that this is a part of those collaborative principles, in that we want to make sure that we are consistently engaging in these types of principles. We develop them, we use them. We also want to make sure that we have self-reflection of how we are in this partnership, and talking with each other and calling each other out when we are, quite frankly, not being a good partner. That's okay. I mean, how do we become better partners in our marriage? I mean, if you have a problem with your significant other, even if you're not married, your long-term relationship, you have a problem with your significant other, you're going to say something. You're not going to just sit there quietly and let it fester. Well, sometimes we do, but that's not a good way to do it, right? So in these partnerships, we want to make sure that we just stay loyal to those collaboration principles, constantly be reflecting about how we could be doing better, and being able to bounce having those uncomfortable conversations sometimes about ourselves in that relationship or in that partnership. So that's one way that we really try to work to continue to have knowledge, capacity, and values of community engagement, or the research, the partnership. Also, power through organizational affiliation. Again, I can't stress this enough. Having organizations that have the ability to have a larger capacity is super important in order to help sustain relationships. If we can get organizations that have more access to more funding, more resources, aka UNMC, to continue to support different types of partnerships. It really helps to sustain those partnerships, but it also helps to grow that partnership in a way that you may not quite possibly have had an opportunity to do because you didn't have access to those types of resources. Shameless plug for the Center for Reducing Health Disparities. That's why we're here. That is how it got started. The community said, we need something like this. We need a center. We need a place where we can work safe and in respect and in an environment that they feel respected to do this type of work and be able to partner with the institution. And so the center was established in order for us to be able to consistently have that connection to the community and continue to support different community partnerships. And then lastly is recognizing or recognition of community knowledge and skills. Community partners, toot your own horns because you're experts too. I know sometimes you come to the table and you feel like, wow, these people are talking over my head with this jargon. I don't know what they're talking about, but so what? You have a level of expertise that they don't have as an academic partner. You're bringing something to the table that they don't have. If they didn't think you were valuable, they wouldn't have asked you to come to the table. Well, that's not true. But my point is that you are valuable. You offer something at the table every time you come, every time you show up. And so it's really important that you toot your own horn. You let people know that you offer something that others may not be able to offer. And that's why you're sitting at that table. So it's really important to recognize those knowledge and skills that you have. And the community, or excuse me, the academic partners, recognize that of your community partners and lift them up. So it's not really just about the community partner tooting their own horn, but toot it for them. Because sometimes our community partners are humble and they are about just doing the work and not worried about getting recognition, but they need to be recognized and we need to make sure that we continue to support one another. And the same goes for community partners, making sure that y'all also support and lift up your academic partners as well, because they're doing some work as well on their side to try to make sure things happen for your community, for the community and for that partnership. But definitely speak on our community partners and lift them up. We have some challenges for sustaining this type of thing. I won't beat this to death because this is pretty known. Obviously support and funding for the core infrastructure that's necessary to sustain these types of partnerships. We at UNMC have the Office of Community Engagement, which Dr. Heidi Keeler is the director for. And basically her office is what we're trying to do is build that core infrastructure that's available for community academic partnerships to really continue to sustain with the work that they're doing, but also the partnerships that they have together. So really just making sure that there is that support and funding, but not all universities or not all institutions have that. And then making sure we understand it takes a lot of time to plan and implement community engaged research. It's just a timely thing. And for lack of time, I'm gonna quickly run through these last couple slides so I can wrap up for Miss Wendy to start her presentation. So the other things are showing the value of the research to your institution. I talked about this before, making sure you're promoting the work that you're doing, not only promoting your partnership and how you worked to develop that partnership and maintain it, but also promote what you did out of that partnership. So that way it can, one, get recognized, and two, people might throw you some money for your work to continue. If not money, they'll definitely provide some type of support to just make sure that it continues, but showing the importance of your work. Institutional base and flexibility in funding, having academic partners involved in research is important in the sense that sometimes they have time that's reserved for research activities. And they may not necessarily need funding per se for them to be involved. So try to leverage that as community partners and understand what that is and see how that can work for both you, the community partner and academic partner. And then reassessing, partner organizations continuing the programs. If you have a program or project you started, figuring out a way that it can be housed in certain areas. When we start projects at the Center for Reducing Health Disparities, we make sure that it gets housed in the community. We don't keep it here in the center and say, this is our project. We make sure that we find a home for it in the community and work hard to make sure that that is maintained or sustained in that community. And then reassessment and continuous planning processes, just making sure that you're constantly reassessing your goals, your priorities, your partnership. that's really, really important in just maintaining and sustaining your partnership. So lastly, some best practices. Basically, I'm summarizing what I just said in these last 2 slides. So I will stop here, but I do want to just encourage you all to make sure that you are mindful of who you are as an individual in partnerships, but also mindful of who you are as you represent your respective organizations, because that is super important in order for you to really sustain your partnerships, understand the resources that you have available to you, and be creative and working together of how you can go after those resources together in order to make sure you sustain the partnership, but also the great work that you're all doing. Don't worry, we'll share these slides with y'all too. And then the last thing I want to mention to you before some of you, I see y'all packing up to possibly leave. I got something for you before you leave, but I want to challenge each of you to use one of the icebreakers at your next community academic partnered or team meeting. I do have a small roll of yarn for everyone so that you can all try that activity with your group, but also try some of the other activities that are on the handout too to help break the ice with your new community partners and with your old partners. Thank you.